addressing mental health needs of Syrian refugee children. He joins me now from New York. The psychological scars for anyone who's witnessed conflict or is living as a refugee are immense. What particularly, though, is the suffering for the children?
Well, war is very difficult to comprehend. Losing your home or family member is difficult for any person. For children who experience this, of course, you need to really put yourself in a child's mind. It's unimaginable. In our study, we found huge numbers in terms of like 80% of the children said that they lost somebody in their family, for example. So they lost a family member, they witnessed a lot of horror, and they are no longer living in their homes, no longer going to school. So for children, this is unimaginable, and that is really adding to the case where any human being suffer, children suffer even more.
And they are seeing the stress, in some cases, the delirium and the mental consequences of this in adults. But what does it mean for children? What are the symptoms they are displaying, and what does it mean further down the line, perhaps, in terms of adolescence and adulthood?
Well, in our study, we actually used a standardized measure of PTSD, and we found about 45% of our participants, this was at a refugee camp, 45% of them experienced a clinical level of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is 10 times more than what you would observe in a typical population. So that by itself, we also looked into depression. That was also at a much higher level than expected. That puts them at risk in terms of sleeping, in terms of eating, in terms of social interactions, and of course in terms of their development. Childhood is a precious time. There are many critical milestones that typical children have to go through, and that's what these kids will be suffering from, or disadvantage, because they won't be able to learn, they won't be able to pay attention, they won't be able to develop physically at a typical pace because of the barriers that they have already witnessed. Unless these barriers are addressed, unfortunately, the research is very clear. PTSD is a post-traumatic stress disorder, so it's post the trauma. And if they are not addressed, then we are talking about another lost generation.
Well, yes, and people use that expression, lost generation, but how much therapy do these children need? And presumably, unfortunately, it would be impossible to give them what they need in the camps where they're living now, or where they are traveling around Europe.
Well, actually, the camps in Turkey, where we did some of the studies, they are receiving the health service that they needed. I mean, they are one of the best served children. The problem is only a small number of children are now living in camps. Most of them are no longer living in camps. And the Turkish government, compared to some of the other places where they receive large numbers of refugees, is doing a good job. The problem is about 90% of the children are no longer living in camps. The traditional delivery of mental health services is not an option for this population because we simply do not have the professional services in place. You need to have Arabic speakers, you need to have that many psychologists. That's not the case. However, children are very resilient. If you invest in these children, in this generation, in terms of recreational activities, in terms of after-school programs, in terms of just a typical school setting, they will thrive. We know that children are resilient. We know that they can come back from this horror that they have experienced, but we have to invest. And there we really have a choice as humanity. Do we invest in the future of 2 to 3 million children, or witness another horror that we have witnessed in Africa, that we have witnessed in Central Asia, on the borders between Pakistan and Afghanistan, and most recently in the Middle East? Unless we address the immediate and long-term needs of these children in terms of providing education, in terms of providing mental health, we will end up finding ourselves in another situation where terrorist organizations, crime organizations recruiting some of these children because they simply do not have another option.
All right, okay. Professor Sirin, thank you very much indeed for joining us